Proverbs chapter 26. Like snow in summer or rain in harvest, honor is not fitting for a fool. Like a fluttering sparrow or a darting swallow, an undeserved curse does not come to rest. A whip for the horse, a halter for the donkey, and a rod for the backs of fools. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. Like cutting off one's feet or drinking violence is the sending of a message by the hand of a fool. Like a lame man's legs that hang limp is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. Like tying a stone in a sling is the giving of honor to a fool. Like a thorn brush in a drunkard's hand is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. Like an archer who wounds at random is he who hires a fool or any passerby. As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. Do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him. The sluggard says, "There is a lion in the road, a fierce lion roaming the streets." As a door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed. The sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He is too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. The sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who answer discreetly. Like one who seizes a dog by the ears is a passerby who meddles in a quarrel not his own. Like a madman shooting firebrands or deadly arrows is a man who deceives his neighbor and says, "I was only joking." Without wood, a fire goes out. Without gossip, a quarrel dies down. As charcoal to embers and as wood to fire, so is a quarrelsome man for kindling strife. The words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to a man's inmost parts. Like a coating of glaze over earthenware are fervent lips with an evil heart. A malicious man disguises himself with his lips, but in his heart he harbors deceit. Though his speech is charming, do not believe him, for 7 abominations fill his heart. His malice may be concealed by deception, but his wickedness will be exposed in the assembly. If a man digs a pit, he will fall into it. If a man rolls a stone, it will roll back on him. A lying tongue hates those it hurts, and a flattering mouth works ruin. Proverbs chapter 26. Today is January the 26th, 2023. A few notable things here today. One is that earlier, right before I read this scripture, I read Psalm chapter 9, and even while I was reading it, so this is a connection, right? I love the way God, I love the way God connects the scripture together. And Jordan Peterson talks about the Bible being the first hyperlinked text. So hyperlinked meaning you can get from here to there directly. So in Psalm chapter 9, verse 15, it says this: "The nations have fallen into the pit they have dug." We go to Proverbs chapter 26, verse 27, and it says, "If a man digs a pit, he will fall into it. If a man rolls a stone, it will roll back onto him." And the psalmist is saying in Psalm 9, this is what's happened to the nations. And if you want to go to that Psalm 9 video, you could find a link to it below in the show description. But I talk there too about verses 19 and 20, where the nations having fallen into the pit they have dug, how the psalmist is asking for the nations to be properly judged. So back to Proverbs 26, there are 2 verses right next to each other here in the scripture that you read them and you're like, well, that's a direct contradiction, or that makes no sense. That doesn't follow. And there's several instances in the scripture where there are these contradictory types of things. And as a Christian, I'm not afraid of those things. They kind of attract my attention, actually, and make me study them deeper. And that's probably one of the reasons that God sprinkles them around, is because just like in the proverb we read recently, Proverbs 25, as in yesterday, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter. So he's concealed meaning in things, and in the glory of kings to search it out, or to search out a matter is the glory of kings. So we bring, I think, glory to ourselves by seeking to make connections and seeking to uncover what God has planted around, like Easter eggs for us to go discover. So here are the two verses, and they seem to directly go against each other, right? Or they seem to contradict each other. So verse 4 says, do not answer a fool according to his folly. Stop right there. So verse 5 says, answer a fool according to his folly. Do not answer the fool according to his folly, or answer the fool according to his folly. So verse 4, to complete the reading, says, do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him yourself. You will fall into the foolishness of the discussion. Verse 5 says, answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. Well, this is a great paradox, or it's a funny little paradox, depending on how you want to see it. I think one of the paradoxes is these two verses describe the sort of exasperation you can experience when you're dealing with someone who you have determined is probably a fool. That's a harsh judgment to cast. So, and I don't want to be quick to cast judgment, but when I'm dealing with someone who's acting foolish or being foolish or seems to act foolishly frequently, it's exasperating to deal with them. You want to answer, but the minute that you do, and you know that you've experienced this, it's like the minute you get entangled in that conversation, you are dragged down to their level, right? And it's exasperating. Now, if you don't answer them, if you just let them go on their way, well, then they become wise in their own eyes. So let's look at verse 4 in isolation. Do not answer a fool according to his folly. So that leaves you the option of answering the fool, but not according to his folly. Answering the fool in a way that is wise. Now, verse 3, preceding verse 4, seems to give what might be a politically incorrect answer for how to deal with a fool, instead of answering them according to their foolishness. That verse says, a whip for the horse, a halter for the donkey, and a rod for the backs of fools. So this basically says, well, instead of answering the fool, you can just beat them with a rod. Or instead of answering a fool according to their folly, you can beat them with a rod. Now, immediately, people jump to imagery of people being hit with rods, and the hitting goes on and on and on. And it's violent and deadly and wrong. And people may look at verse 3, and people especially don't have any experience with horses, and say, a whip for the horse? You don't use a whip on a horse, that's cruel. A halter for the donkey? Well, that restricts the donkey's freedom. And guys, I don't want to get too sidetracked in sort of this discussion about, like, I don't want to alienate any of you because you read this and you're like, well, you're a proponent of violence and you know, that sort of thing. Well, in one sense, yeah, I don't want you to click away and lay aside this video and categorize me. But on the other hand, I have to be honest to my opinion. And my opinion is formed as yours is, right? From our own inputs into our lives and our own experiences. And I was raised on a farm in Texas, and we loved our animals dearly. And we were taught to love our animals dearly and to care for them even before we cared for ourselves, because they were dependent creatures. And so we were to care for them, to nurture them, to set them up for success in their animalness. So we did occasionally use a whip on a horse, not the big giant whoosh, cracking whip, but when a horse wasn't paying attention. A horse is a big animal and has thick skin, and if you want to get its attention, sometimes what is a tap to us is a whip for a horse, right? It can be, right, depending on how it's applied and all these other contextual things. A halter for the donkey, well, the donkey is, of course, the reputation of a donkey is that it's a stubborn creature, right? Doesn't want to be led. Well, sometimes you have to pull a donkey to get it to go someplace. And a lot of times, if you want to pull a donkey to get it to go someplace, you can't just have a rope around its neck. It will not give you enough leverage. And you'll end up, if you just have a rope around its neck and it gets tighter as you pull it, if you have it set with a slip knot, it just gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and it ends up harming, the potential to harm the donkey, and then the donkey will be fearing for its life. And at that point, because it senses that its that it's air and blood and things are being cut off. And eventually, if you put a strong enough rope and pull hard enough, can you pull a donkey from around the neck? Yes, you can, but that's not what you should do. Instead, you put a halter on the donkey, right? A halter that goes around its whole head and allows you to pull with a great amount of force without damaging the donkey. And so I think the inference here from verse 3, at least one, and my interpretation of it is look, sometimes when someone's being foolish, they have to be dealt with loving force. They have to be dealt with in a way that doesn't use words. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to strike them. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use a rod if you do strike them, or that you have to use it on their back if you do strike them. But coming out of the realm of words. So if a fool is talking in their foolishness, you have the option to respond to them not according to their folly, but according to wisdom, or simply according to force. And certainly there are instances where people who are being dangerously foolish do need to be responded to with force and decisively, and sometimes quickly. Now, verse 5 says, answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. So perhaps maybe for verse 5, we're talking about a different context, right? We're talking about the context of you're having a discussion and you have the opportunity to improve this person. Now, you have to be really careful here because we have a warning verse for this, right? Verse 12, and there's others like it. Do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than for him. So, going back to this, we don't want to put on the airs of being a wise person and say, in my great wisdom, I will now share with you the keys of responsibility, knowledge, truth, justice, wisdom, and the right way of living. Come, my simpleton, and listen to my great ministrations. No, that would probably be, according to verse 12, answering a fool according to his folly, because now you've stumbled right into verse 12 here. There's more hope for the fool than there is for you, because maybe the fool doesn't think of themselves as being a wise person. But if there's a person who's being foolish, and you have the wherewithal to sort of make that judgment, and you have the time and patience to deal with this person, and you can see plainly, objectively, that this person could use some help, then answering them according to their folly, or they'll be wise in their own eyes, maybe that's saying, take advantage of an opportunity to help them see that they're being foolish. Take advantage of the opportunity, and through discussion, through answering them, right? Taking their foolishness and putting it back on them in the form of a question, right? Saying, you just said this, but if that's true, then it leads to this. That's sort of answering a fool according to their folly, taking their words and putting them back to them in a way that allows them to see with a bigger perspective than what they're currently seeing in, and preventing them, therefore, from being wise in their own eyes. And maybe it's a foolish person, or a person who's gathered a collection of foolish habits or behaviors, and you've shown them, you've held up in front of them or displayed to them, look, this is how you're coming across, and I don't think this is going to lead to the outcomes that you probably want, then they will no longer be wise in their own eyes. And maybe they will adopt an appropriate type and level of humility. And then maybe they will be more cautious about those behaviors and habits, and maybe they'll start to try to change them. So that's some of the ways you can deal with this apparent paradox. One other thing to note, if you're good at remembering things, is that there are 4 very interesting verses that deal with laziness in Proverbs chapter 26, verses 13 through 16. So just make a mental note of that. If you want to ruminate on some proverbs that have to do with laziness and how it presents itself, and how it can be observed, and then maybe think about, well, what's the effect of that? Well, there's 4 good verses, and the Lord knows that even as I read these things to you, I am pricked in my own mind and consciousness, right, of like, oh man, I can sense my own sort of, that's applicable to me as I'm reading them. So please do not think that because I read these things to you that I am a perfect practitioner or someone who understands even everything that I'm reading. It is a journey, and I'm glad you've chosen to join me on this part of it so that we're journeying in a way together. Again, that's Proverbs chapter 26. Thanks for joining me.